Greetings, chess players. My name is Coach Tortoise, and I have been teaching chess a very, very long time. In today's lesson, we are going to look at a very important move in chess called castling. Castling is a very special move because it is the only time in chess when you are allowed to move two of your pieces at the same time, and it's the only move in chess where the king can move two squares at once. Castling is very important because it usually moves the king to a safer location. In fact, a high percentage of games are lost simply because one player doesn't get their king safely castled soon enough. So, in most games of chess, strong players castle in the early stage of the game, referred to as the opening. Let's see how it works. When you castle, you move your king two squares towards your rook, and then place the rook on the adjacent square on the other side of the king. This may sound tricky, but it's actually a simple procedure. While castling, I like to think 1-2 a la kazoo. For example, 1-2 a la kazoo. There are two ways in which you can castle. One is called castling kingside. The other is castling queenside. 1-2 a la kazoo. White just castled kingside. 1-2 a la kazoo. Black castled queenside. 1-2 a la kazoo. White castles queenside. 1-2 a la kazoo. And black castles kingside. Obviously, in order to castle in either direction, all the squares between the king and rook must be clear of obstructions. This means there cannot be a queen, knight, or bishop blocking the path between the king and rook. Otherwise, we cannot castle. In addition, we cannot castle if the king or rook have moved previously. This makes sense because in order for the king to run two squares, it needs all of its energy, and likewise, in order for the rook to hop over the king, it also needs a full energy bar. So even if the king or rook move and then return to their original squares, they are not allowed to castle. For example, if white's king moves up and black's rook moves over, white's king can move back and black's rook could move back, but they cannot castle now. White cannot castle either direction because white has moved his king. Black cannot castle kingside because he has already moved his kingside rook. However, black could still castle queenside because the rook on A8 had not moved yet. Sadly for the king, it cannot castle in order to escape from a check. If the king is in check, the checking piece must either be captured or its check blocked in order for the king to castle. For example, in this position, black's bishop on b4 is checking the white king. In order for white to castle, we would need to block that check somehow. In this case, I chose to put my knight on c3 to block the check. Of course, I also could have put my knight on d2 to also block the check. Or bishop on c3 to block the check. Or even queen d2 to block the check. But that would not be very good because then the bishop could take the queen. Finally, the king cannot move through or into a check while castling. This rule makes sense because when castling, the king is running to safety. Since a king can never step into check, it cannot run through or land on a threatened square while castling. For example, in this position, black's bishop on a6 is threatening the f1 square. The king cannot move through f1 to g1 to castle, because that would be stepping into check. So black's bishop on a6 is preventing us from castling on this move. Because the king usually finds increased safety away from the dangerous center files, while the rook boosts its attacking potential by moving out of the corner, castling should be played early in a chess game and in almost every game you play. Personally, I am almost always castling within the first 10 moves, and you should try to do this as well. For example, in a recent game I played pawn to e4, 1-2. My opponent also put his king's pawn into the center, 1-2. Then I moved my knight, ding, ding, dong, to f3. My opponent moved his knight, ding, ding, dong, to c6. I moved my other knight, ding, ding, dong, to c3. And my opponent moved his other knight, ding, ding, dong, to f6. I moved my bishop so that I could castle, zip, 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 zip. And my opponent moved his bishop so that he could castle, zip, 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 zip. I then castled, 1-2, alakazoo. And my opponent castled, 1-2, alakazoo. In another recent game, my opponent played pawn to e4, 1-2. And I responded with pawn to e5, 1-2. My opponent played ding, ding, dong with his knight, and I played ding, ding, dong, developing my knight. My opponent played zip, 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 zip to prepare to castle and develop his bishop. And I played pawn to a6, up one square to threaten his bishop. He did not want to lose his bishop, so he played zip backwards with his bishop to square a4. I then played ding, ding, dong, knight to f6. My opponent played 1, 2, alakazoo to castle. Black can't castle yet, so I played bishop e7, zip, to move the bishop out of the way so that I could castle. My opponent played rook e1, and I played pawn to b5. 1, 2, to attack his bishop. He played bishop b3, zip, to move his bishop to safety. And then I can castle. 1, 2, alakazoo. Again, both sides have castled within 10 moves. And one final example from a recent game I played. My opponent played king's pawn up 2, 1, 2. I did the same thing. 1, 2. My opponent moved his king's knight, ding, ding, dong, and I moved my queen's knight, ding, ding, dong. My opponent played zip, 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 bishop to c4, and I played zip, 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 bishop to c5. My opponent played pawn to c3, just up one square. I developed my king's knight, ding, ding, dong, to f6. My opponent placed a second pawn into the center, 1, 2, and I captured it, smacko. And my opponent captured my pawn back, smacko. I need to move my bishop so that it's safe, bishop to b4, Jackarooski. My bishop is checking the white king. White doesn't want to move his king because then he could not castle. So my opponent played bishop to d2 to block the check. And I played bishop takes d2, smacko, and that's a check. My opponent needs to get out of check in order to castle without moving his king. So he played ding, dong, dong, smacko, and took my bishop to threaten his bishop on c4 and get a pawn in the center. I played pawn to d5. My opponent captured my pawn with his e-pawn, smacko. And I took back with my knight, ding, dong, dong, smacko. White castles, 1, 2, alakazoo, and black castles, 1, 2, alakazoo. Both players, again, castled within the first 10 moves. Before I finish today's lesson, I need to tell you one more thing. You can only castle with a king and rook. Queens or anything else are not allowed to castle. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson on castling in chess. Remember, you are the king in chess, so castle early so you can command your army from a safe location. Thank you for joining me today for our lesson on castling. Be sure to like our video and subscribe to the Daily Chess Musings YouTube page. You may now go to your quiz on dailychessmusings.com. Once again, I have been your host, Coach Tortoise. Have a good week.